When I was 21 years old, in 1951, I was November the 16th, 1951. I was sworn into the Army, drafted. So anyway, then went on to Fort Leonard Wood to basic training, and then I was very fortunate because I was a farm boy, and so I got into heavy equipment because I have farm boys who run equipment, and so the heavy equipment section was made up basically of truck drivers and farm people, and so I was very comfortable with that. So I was very fortunate to get into that because I enjoyed that, and then took our basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, and heavy equipment schooling. We got down there in Fort Leonard Wood around the last of November, and winter time in Illinois and Missouri is pretty harsh, and it was cold and snowy, but we got through it, and but a lot of cold nights, and the week that we served out in the pup tent, so that was a cold, very cold, snowy week. But anyway, we survived it, got us toughened up for Korea, I guess. So then when I got out of that, why then in the spring when we got through that, we then got a few days leave, and then had orders for Far East Command, and my folks, they didn't know what they called a VCOM, and I said, well, I got to report to Seattle, Washington. Well, that just Seattle, Washington was to get on the ship to go, but I didn't tell the folks I was going to Korea. I didn't want mother to worry about her, which was the wrong thing to do, but I did. I thought that was best at that time. So anyway, then before I got on the ship at Seattle, I wrote them a letter and told them, well, tomorrow I'm getting on the ship headed for Korea. And of course that was a shock to them because they didn't know what was going on anyway, and I didn't tell them. But anyway, so then we got to Japan, and I had three good buddies that went into the Army the same day, and became very good friends, went through heavy equipment schooling together. And one of them got held up in Japan for a couple of weeks for some extra training. And the other, he and I was very close, so then we got on another ship, and it was 3 days on the main ship going over. We thought it was terrible. There was 900 troops and 600 dependents on the top cabins where the women and children, and we wasn't allowed to be up there. We had to stay on the lower decks and pull guard duty on that to see that none of them got up there. But anyway, and one real rough day where the ship, I didn't see how anything that big could stand that much roughness. The water was so rough, and it'd come up over the ship, and we wasn't allowed up there. And anyway, and when that prop come out of that water, that ship would just vibrate and shake. And I thought, it's got to break in two pretty soon because it can't stand that. But anyway, that was what little I knew about. So, but we got to Japan, then we was there just 2 days and got a clothing issue and a rifle issue for her in Korea. Put on this other ship, and it was a smaller ship, and it had 3,600 troops on it, and we was wall to wall with troops, just everywhere. I mean, it was just so crowded. But on 3 days, then we landed at Incheon, and then we got on them little LSDs, I think they call them, to get from. Of course, you've only got a few hours from the ship at Incheon to come in because the tide raises so fast and lowers so fast, and so we had to get on those. And then when we got that flat bottom of the boat, you get so far, and we had to get off about knee foot of water, carry a duffel bag and a rifle, and wade through the water to get to I thought, boy, what are we going to. And the hills up in there wasn't any trees left. They was all shot up. It just bare hills, and in Korea there wasn't many trees anyway, but brush and what have you. But it'd been so much fighting going on there that they just killed most of those little trees up there. And so I asked somebody, where's the front lines at? And they just pointed over the hill because they knew we didn't know nothing, and they wanted to scare us. So just over the hill. And so then they put us on a train, and we rode all night on this little old train with narrow cars and wood seats, and tried to sleep and stopping at every 2 or 3 miles, and the little kids running up down the train begging for the GIs to throw them anything, and there was dozens of them. And finally you just got used to it, because we didn't have anything to throw to give to them. So, but anyway, then we come to another compound the next morning, and that was where they distributed us. So my buddy and I was together, and we was hoping to get to stay together, but we got separated. We never saw each other till we got back from Korea then, and that was a very sad day for us because we was both over there, and we didn't know where we was going. We wished we'd have learned more in training because we thought we was going to head for some heavy fighting, but he and I both was in heavy equipment, so we was both very fortunate to get to run heavy equipment. And then got to the 116th Combat Engineers under the 10th Corps, where I was assigned to. And so the second day there, we got in there one evening, and they were short on blankets, so we just had a cot, and this was in June. But the days was pretty nice, but cold, and nights it got chilly, real cold. And laid on that cot, and I said, boy, I was cold. So the next day, a guy told me, he said, well, did you put the blanket in half and lay on half of it and fold the other half over you? I know. He said, well, that'll help. And so that helped the next night because there's so much cold dampness coming from the ground up. We're just sleeping in a tent with a cot and no floor or anything in it. And so then about a week later, they got a new supply of blankets, and so then we was all issued 2 blankets. But anyway, America wasn't ready for that war. It was too soon after World War II, and they wasn't prepared for it. All we had, the equipment we had to run was leftover junk equipment from World War II. The road graders, the dozers, the drag lines, and that kind of stuff. So then they said, well, we need someone to run a road grader. Well, I can run a road grader. Well, they put me on an old, what we call a tow grader, and run it by hand with the wheels and what have you, and done it all by hand, and pulled with a Caterpillar, a D7 Caterpillar. And it was so rocky over there, I don't know how many times I jumped off of it that day because it'd roll rocks out, and you just pick that grader up and throw it around. So about the second day, the dozer operator got a hold of the lieutenant. He said, we can't use that. He said, he said, you're going to kill that guy back there. He said, I go as slow as I can, but he said he just throws it around. He can't stay on it. So then they parked that one, and so then they put me on what they call a motorized grader, an old Caterpillar, but it wasn't no hydraulics like we have now. It was all manual. With just gearboxes and levers. And so when the first day up there, the guy that trained me there, again, he was experienced with those narrow roads, high mountain passes, and he'd put the grader right out on the edge, and I was sitting there riding with him, and I thought, man, I got to go. When I go in tonight, I tell him, I can't do this. I can't. But when the day got over with, I thought, well, I'll try it another day. But the second, third day, I was accustomed to it. So about the third day, they put me on my own grader, and so I'd learned where the roads were, where we maintained, and so it was. I did that then for 6 months, and then the grader that I was running, the transmission went bad, so they sent it back into ordnance to be fixed. So they put me on a D7 Caterpillar, and that was about anyway 6 months later. So then I went through the summer, the next spring and summer on that. I went through most of the winter on that road grader, and then the next spring and summer got on the Caterpillar, and they put me out in what they call a pioneer, the first dozer to pioneer the road to get just a Jeep over. And of course there was a lot of rocks over there, and they had a lot of air compressors running, drilling through the rocks and dynamiting, blasting off the rocks because they were slow tough. But anyway, that's what I did the rest of the time, and until I was put in for 13 months there in Korea and had enough points to rotate back, and so and then we come back on a General Black ship, and it had I think 2,400 troops or something like that. It was a troop built for a troop ship or converted for a troop ship to hold several troops, but it was fairly comfortable. Not as good as that first General Sims Buckner. I thought it was terrible because I'd never been on a ship before, but it was super nice after I seen it on the other two. But and then the peace treaty was signed July the 27th of 53, and July the 29th we come under the Golden Gate Bridge. So I was in the first shipload of troops back from Korea when the peace treaty was signed. So they did have a band there to receive us back at San Francisco, there close to the Golden Gate Bridge. So and then they flew me back to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I got out in 21 months, because when I got back from Korea, if you had 21 months in, they'd give you early release. So then I should have stayed in the Army. Now hindsight's always good, because I was come back. I was promoted to staff sergeant, which E5, and I was only in 18 months, and I was up to E5 sergeant. And they offered me E6 if I would re-enlist, and at 21 months, E6 was super rank. But I thought my wife needed me. Well, I thought my girlfriend needed me at home worse than the Army needed me, and so I made the right choice again. So anyway, that's kind of the rundown of my military, what I did. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer it for you.
So you said when you very first got to Korea, you landed at Incheon. When exactly was that?
That would have been in June of '52. Of course, the war started in '50, I believe it was, in 1950. And so this was 2 years later, or almost 2 years later. And the main line of resistance was pretty well set up then, but they did make some pushes now and then to where they would come back. But at one time, we had to be ready to move out in an hour. We had to sleep with our clothes on or take our boots off. We had to sleep with our clothes on, and we'd been directed, and we had the explosives to blow the equipment up on the way out and get on the trucks and leave. If the Chinese and North Koreans, of course there was many Chinese that just, from what they tell me, I wasn't up on the line to see it. I saw the trucks where they hauled the dead back, but there's our troops, but not every day, but I've been out on the road, I saw a lot of that. And then the helicopters hauling we had just little bubble helicopters, all I ever saw over there, with a stretcher on each side. They could take 2 wounded soldiers back. But but I wasn't on the line to see any heavy action or fighting. I was fortunate I didn't have to. I just maintained the roads up to the bottom of the hill, where the line was set in, because they had a trench dug from one coast to the other that's where the fellows lived and fought from, and but no, that was in '52 when I got there.
So you said you were drafted, right?
Yes.
What did that feel like?
Well, I just knew. I mean, it was common back then. They had the draft program, and when your time come, you got old enough, and they needed so many men. So I was 21 years old. I was 21. I turned 21 in August, and then in '51. So I was born in '30. So '51, I was 21 years old, and in November, and so that's when I was drafted. But most of them were. There was a few volunteers, but not that many. And so I'm very proud. I'm very proud to say that I did what I did, and now, especially after South Korea really appreciates America, because I've got 2 friends that went back to revisit Korea, and they begged me to go, but my wife said I'm not flying that far on an airplane over that much water, and I wouldn't go without her. But anyway, that was a trip I'd like to have taken, but I didn't do it. And I checked it a couple of years ago, but I decided, well, I'm not going to do that. I'd take my daughter with me, but I decided not to do that. So, but anyway, the South Korea does appreciate America, and they like this. There'll be some people here from South Korea to thank us again, and but because they've really I mean, the pictures I see of South Korea now is just, from what I saw, I wondered what they had to live for, the ones that I saw.
Can you paint me a picture? What did you see? What was it like?
Well, they were just very, very poor people, and they just had this room would be 3 or 4 rice paddies. They just have a very small garden of what we have, and they'd have that, and of course they'd flood it with rice, and they'd done all the work by hand. There was a few of them had an oxen, and but I wasn't. They had moved the civilian people back for about 35 miles from what they call the MRI, main line of resistance, and they had moved them back about 30 miles or so. So I wasn't around. Very, very few, just whenever I'd ride back with a truck somewhere back into the civilian part of South Korea. But they just lived in huts with just up and down the street, just real close to each other, and just a slum area. I mean, but I saw many of those, and women and children, and they'd carry their human waste. They had a little tile or something in the backyard, and they'd dump that in, and then they'd put it in their honey buckets, and they'd had a a pole across their shoulders with a bucket out there on each end, and carrying that out to their edge of the town or wherever their little plot of land was to grow their rice on. And these rice fields had to be water run on them, and they had springs up in the mountains, and they'd put dams up and run that water, and then they down this dam, and then they'd let so much out in this rice paddy and this rice paddy, and they were stair-step down for this little rice paddy, and then they'd had a little gate over there that they'd made them, the walls maybe, the ones I saw maybe 8 inches thick out of rock and mud, and to hold the water in there, and they'd flood that. Of course, they knew how to grow rice, and then they'd cut it by hand, and they'd thrash it by hand, and they had A-frames that they had, and an A-frame would sit on the ground, and then they could squat down just like you can't believe, because they had a squatting position. Our knees and legs wouldn't stand it, but they could just sit there for hours, and then they could just back underneath, put their arms and their shoulder, their arm and their shoulder, get the strap up over their shoulder, and carry this A-frame, and they could carry a tremendous amount of weight on that. They were little short people, and some of the better off ones, like I said, had an oxen and a little two-wheel cart that they'd go out and bring their produce in. And I guess because I wasn't around the civilians enough to really learn very much about it. So, but it was very interesting, and I really felt sorry for them because they were, I thought, so poor, and they had nothing to live for, but just work and try to make a living, And any little twigs, you never saw any sticks, because they'd go out and they'd pick up these little twigs to start their fires and keep warm with in their huts, and they'd just stack them on that A-frames, and they'd be way taller than them. They'd take some kind of rope and tie that on, and they'd get underneath that and lift it up and walk bent over with that up on their back, carrying it back into their village. And so it was, and in the tent, each of us had a South Korean houseboy, we called him, and we paid him a little bit every week to do our laundry, and the one we had where I was at most of the time, he was a good kid. He was a good kid, and the GIs, they sent home for stuff to send him for Christmas, and send him. Well, some of our folks would always send us something for a houseboy, and so we had a very good one. And I've always wondered whatever happened to him, because he was, of course, he learned all the GI slang, which wasn't good, but that's what the GI was. All the swear words and everything, he learned them, and where he could speak them, but he didn't realize what all they were, because that's just the way it was. And there was usually, in our heavy equipment tent, there was usually about 8, and you could sleep 12 in those squad tents, but we'd have from 7 to 8 usually. And but he kept our clothes clean for us, and he really worked at it, and kept our tent swept out and what have you. So, but it got terribly cold there in the wintertime in those tents, and it'd get down to 30 to 35 degrees below zero, and snow, and I plowed snow 13 nights. I run the road grader. I run it at night, and my buddy'd run it during the day. Normally we'd run it a big half a day each, but we had two operators to each piece of road grader or dozer. But then when we needed it at night, well, I run our road grader at night, plowed snow off those mountain passes, and it was good as I look back at it. And
so what area or what city were you?
Well, I was around around the the Punch Bowl. I was up around the Punch Bowl, and then when I run the grader around there most of the time. And then, when Chinese made a big, North Koreans and Chinese made a big push above the Chosin Reservoir, and they really, the Marines, that's what they made the big push on, the Marines, and there's a movie that's the Chosin ones, and they fought their way back out. I mean, they surrounded them, but they hung together and fought their way back out, And so they even brought their dead buddies back with them. They hauled them back out too. They didn't leave any of them. They really put in a tough time there. But I think there was 11 days or something like that, and they just had to drop supplies into them from the air. And the way I understand it, I wasn't there. I mean, it was during about that time. But so then that's when they took myself and another fella, and we put 2 D7 dozers on 4 pontoons with treadway bridges across them. And that was, well, then they found out the next day there wasn't supposed to be but one on there because there wasn't very much of the pontoon sticking out of the water. And it took 4 hours to float us up the Chosen Reservoir to get where we was going, and then we unloaded those dozers, and then we had to build a company area to put the tents up and what have you. And so he and I done that, and then they brought more equipment in, so then we built an escape road out. But they brought supplies and equipment up to us on that reservoir, and because there wasn't any road to get to it on that side of it. But that's when we built an escape road out. We worked probably 3 months getting that built, and in case they made another push, we could have an escape road out. So, but that was because they weren't, I call them mountains over there. They weren't tall mountains, but they was mighty big hills and just straight down, a lot of solid rock, awful lot of rock. There wasn't very many big trees up there or anything. They just wasn't, because they kept them cut down, and they needed them.
Now seeing South Korea, compared to what it looked like while you were there, and now seeing pictures, how does that?
It's amazing, because they've got skyscrapers and everything else there, and they're the builders of many televisions and computers and just many big business people, and they're I don't know for sure, but I think I've been told the National Korean War Museum was going to be built in Tuscola, a little old town south of Champaign. Well, that didn't work because they couldn't get government funding. So then they said, well, if you'll move it, I can't remember if they went to Springfield. No, they went to Rantoul. Rantoul's an old Navy air base up there, I believe it is. They said, if you move it up here, we'll give you the land and revitalize this. So they put the temporary museum up there, had groundbreaking for a new national museum. Well, the same thing happened there did in Tuscola. It just wasn't enough interest and wasn't enough people coming to the temporary museum, so they said, well, Springfield would be the place. Well, they was there for a year and a half, and they had an option to some land to build it there. Well, the same thing there. Couldn't get any funding, and there wasn't enough people to provide it, to fund it. No funding for it. So then they said, well, Chicago. And so then they went to Chicago. Same thing happened there. So then they said New York is the place. So South Korea, this is all hearsay to me. I've not heard it officially from somebody, and I knew a fellow that was on the board, so I'm sure it's real true. But South Korea said, we will give you $4 million if you'll build it in New York. So I've been told it's supposed to be done this year, but I haven't got any data on it for sure. There's nobody that really knows yet. So if it is, I hope there'll be a bus trip out there to New York. I'd like to see that, because I'm really interested in the Korean War area, I guess I should say, and the Korean people, because they have done it's one of the fastest growing countries, and there's some smart people there, because they have come a long ways in 60 plus years now. So,
what branch of the military were you in?
I was in the Army, and I was sent to Korea and assigned to 10th Corps. The 10th Corps was over the 116th Combat Engineers. They had several battalions. And the 116th was what I was assigned to, 116th Combat Engineers. And I was moved around to different companies. I was assigned to the headquarters and service company, but I was duty serving out to the A, B, or C line companies, they call it. And then we had a tent out there that we'd stay in, our equipment be in that the line company. And they took care of the roads and whatever heavy equipment, building the company areas and what have you. It was interesting, and we When it was raining, we still had to have the grader out there running. I don't know why. I couldn't figure that out. We didn't run it very hard because it really wasn't doing any good. It was just pushing water and mud across the road. So, but that was one of the things as I understood it. But I just worked for them. So, and but I'll say one thing: the Army fed us very good. I never ate any C rations. They always had, where I was at, we had hot meals 3 times a day and never had to eat out of the cans. And I ate one time when on a train when I first got to Korea, and the next time when I got back to Fort Riley, Kansas, on Sunday morning, we went over for chow. And we went in the mess hall, and they had C rations all set up there. Take whatever you wanted. And we picked up a tray on one end, walked to the other end, and laid the tray down. We never picked up anything. And in 30 minutes, they called over the squawk box. Come back, we've got some other stuff for breakfast. You fellas come back and come through the line again. We've got some other stuff we've set out for you to eat. So they knew. I guess we thought, chip on our shoulder, we didn't feel like we had to eat C rations back in the United States now. So they didn't try that one, I guess, but one time. So that was when they first opened Fort Riley back up to discharge, to release the troops as they came back. So, because I think they knew that the war was almost over. So, but we was the first troops back through Fort Riley on the discharge end of it.
What was your experience like as you came back home?
People, well, where have you been? I never thought anything about it. Well, I've been in the Army, been to Korea. Oh, but I mean there was no fanfare or anything. The only fanfare we got was when we come underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and only that was because we was the first shipload back after the peace treaty was signed. So that was the reason that we had the fanfare there. And then they took us in, and of course we had a great meal, steak and milk and whatever you wanted. They fed us very good then. And but I can't complain about the food or anything like that. The only thing, when I was there after it started, but the troops that was there the year before and the year and a half before, they didn't have the proper clothing. Those fellows really suffered because they just didn't have. We weren't ready for that, and they was putting stuff together and what have you, and it wasn't pleasant. But for those, but they done the best they could. One time when the war was going on there, the companies that made ammunition went on strike. Harry Truman ordered them to get back to work. We've got a war fighting going on. We've got to have it. He ordered them back to work, which I was proud of, because Harry Truman had to make a lot of decisions during that time that other presidents didn't have to make, like at the end of World War II, drop the atomic bomb, because within 2 more days they was going to invade Japan, which would have cost us many, 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 many thousands of lives, because they was ready for us. But so that changed their mind in 2 or 3 days after the second bomb. So
when you were first drafted, what was it like kind of adapting to the new military life?
Well, and we look back at it now that we're old, and they got young people, and they've got to tear their, I don't know, morale down or ego down. They got to break that and then bring you back the way they want you. Now that's as I see it. That's just as a farm boy's opinion. But we're afraid to say anything back to them, because you get KP or anything else. You just take whatever they tell you, and get through the basic training. Then it's a different game. But and there's nothing wrong with that. It worked back then. It probably wouldn't work today, but it worked back then. And but it was a change. And get up in the morning and hollering and yelling at you and what have you, and you're afraid not to do it. And like one time, we wasn't getting out of the barracks fast enough to line up when they holler, so we went through that for an hour, probably 8 or 10 times. Well, go back in, and you're not. I want you to hit that door and like you're tearing it off. I want you out here immediately. And so we did that, just things like that. Well, it wasn't going to make any difference if we got there a half a minute earlier or whatever, but they thought it did. It was something that they, and then they'd tell you when you can imagine 30 or 40 to each platoon, and never carried a rifle before, and you got to do it a certain way, and they'll tell you, oh, you guys look like carrying a bunch of mop sticks. You guys, look at those soldiers over there, how they are. You guys will never you got to shape up before you'll ever be like that. And just as we look back at it, well, so what? We learn it, but that's the way they taught you. And wasn't anything wrong with it, just the way they did it back then. And we was young fellas, and that's why they got to have young fellas like running equipment over there. I wouldn't today think about putting the equipment into position, especially the dozer, pushing the rocks over the side of that and turning that, because you'd push those rocks and they'd go down over the hill 40 or 100 feet before they stop rolling. And you're up there on that rock, and well, I wouldn't think of doing that today. But young person, tell you to do that, why, that's what, one time it slid over, they asked me to, I was pioneering that road, and it was raining and it was slick, and I slid over the hill too far, and I couldn't get it back up on the tracks I was in. And so the lieutenant in charge said, well, can you drive it down that hill? I said, it's awfully steep. I don't know. He said, well, you think you can? I said, well, maybe I can. I'm not sure. Well, let me go down and see if there's any mines, because they had a tape up. We weren't supposed to get, it was like 30 feet away from where we was working, each side of us, and they cleared all that hillside with mines that was planted in there. Let me go down if I see any mines down there. So he walked through that, because I had to go farther down than that. So he walked down there and through the brush and everything, looking for 3 little prongs sticking up out of to set the mine off, landmine. Well, I don't see any. Come on down. Well, when I started down the hill, it was raining. It was just brush and real hard. I call it like soapstone, and it was slick. And that dozer I thought it must have went 25 mile an hour for about 60 feet, and then it turned sideways, and it threw me off. I thought it was rolling over, but it just one side laid it up on the side. It didn't turn on over. But I was trying to roll away to keep away from it, because it threw me off so quick. I thought it was going to roll over me. But it didn't. It just, and we worked 3 days getting that back out of there, because we had to anchor up around about 7 trees with cables and blocking tackles to pull it back up then. But I got on it and drove it again. So anyway, but that was just one of the experiences. And one night I was out there, it was about 30 below zero, and snow on the ground, and from 8 o'clock till 8 o'clock the next morning, guarding the dozer, because it quit up on the mountain pass, up on the Punch Bowl Pass. And the fellow that was with me, it wasn't one of my friends, but out of the line company, they took 2 of us up there at about 8 o'clock that night. And at midnight, there was a Jeep came by. It was a blackout. We couldn't have any fire lights or any fire or anything, because it was wasn't in the line of where the enemy could see what was going on. And so at midnight, he said, you can freeze to death out here if you want to, but he said, I'm going to catch this Jeep, go back in. I'm not staying out here. I said, I'm not going to be a court-martial for not doing what I was told to do. And so he went back in. And so the second day, the colonel over that battalion, Colonel Richardson, was really a fine man. He would come by on his Jeep, and he had a driver, of course, and he stopped and got out of his Jeep, and I jumped off the grader to salute him. He said, you don't have to do that. I just got a question for you. He said, are you okay from the other night, all-night deal out in this cold weather? I said, oh, I'm fine. Well, I just wanted to know about that. And shortly after that, I was promoted to staff sergeant. So I assume that's it, because none of my other friends made staff sergeant, and in that short time. So I assumed, because he knew what happened. He was informed what happened. So I assumed that, and I don't know any other reason. So, but anyway, I did what I thought I was told to do. So anyway, I feel good about it.
What kind of friendships or camaraderie did you form through that time?
I'm glad you asked that, because when we was drafted, I met 4 fellows the first night that was within 50 miles from where I live, 40 miles. And when we got on the train, we went from Mount Sterling to Quincy on a bus, and then when we got there, got acquainted with these 4 fellows. There were several more of us. There was like 12 of us from the county I went in, and like 18 or so from the Quincy area. But anyway, I met these 4, and we just kind of bonded over the next, and went through basic training together, and then went through heavy equipment schooling together. And so we became close, and when we'd get a weekend pass, why, we'd go home for the night. We'd get off at noon on Saturday and be back in by 6 o'clock Monday morning. Anyway, we became very close. And so then after we was out about, maybe 12, 15 years, we got reacquainted. I mean, we knew each other, but we just kind of went our separate ways, and ones that wasn't married, which wasn't married, we got married and what have you. So we ought to get together. So my wife and I loved entertaining, so we said, well, we was kind of in the middle of some of them. There was about 7 or 8 of us to start with, but anyway, so they came over for a potluck dinner and Sunday, and we just had, and then we was having kids. Well, I had kids, but then they came, so we'd have 30 or so at our house, and just really enjoyed it. So we had it for every year for 2 or 3 years. Finally said, well, we need to pass this around to others. So then the 3 over east, they kind of dropped off. They wasn't as interested but there left 5 of us, and their last names was Ward, Still, Likes, and Tenhouse. Yeah. And so anyway, that was 4 of them, and another name was Clevenger. Anyway, we just called each other our last name. But anyway, we just had a real good time, and I'm proud to say that we've stayed good friends all these years. We went to their kids' weddings, and they came to our children's weddings, and we just knew them very well. Of the 5, none of them has ever been divorced. They were all good Christian people. So we've just stayed good friends. But of those 5 of us fellas, I'm the only one left living. And there was one of them that was a year older than me, and the rest of them was my age or younger. But they just didn't have as good a health to live, and one of their widows has passed away since then. So I'm the only one left. But we stay in touch with 3 of the widows that's left. One of them, she's in a home. She's not well, but the rest of them are pretty good. So, but we stay in touch with them every 6 months or so. We'll go to Quincy and have breakfast with them or something. We meet in a restaurant, have breakfast. So we know about all of them. And so anyway, it's been very good. That was very good. And then like this, Houston Thomas. His Warren H. Thomas. Well, when I hadn't seen him for 30 years, and I got reacquainted with him. He's from Linden, Indiana. You'll meet him tomorrow. Anyway, we just got reacquainted, like I told you about the M1 rifle. So anyway, and we get together every 2 years, if not every year. We went over last year and stayed close to them, and they came and spent a day with us, and over in Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana. So anyway, so we're good friends, and we talk to each other, and so just real good friends. And but I've lost a lot of them. I don't know where they're at, but it's interesting. And we have talked to one in Oklahoma, but it's been a couple of years. It just didn't go very far. But we checked with him, and his health wasn't too good then. So, but anyway, it's been good. That part's been good too.
So how did you stay in touch, like, with family or friends back home while you were there?
Well, like I say, I worked a big half a day, so I had a lot of extra time. I wrote a lot of letters to my friends, and to Betty, which is now my wife, I wrote every day, and she wrote every day. And so I might not get them for 4 or 5 days, and then get 4 or 5 at a time. And my mother wrote pretty much every day. And of course, it didn't cost me anything for postage because it was free. We could send letters out of their airmail free, so it didn't cost anything for postage. They sent me a lot of stationery to write back to them, and so my wife's got a bunch of those letters. She read some of them a while back, and so it was interesting. So, but anyway, and then I had some good friends that went into basically around the time I did, and so I wrote to some of them, and so I had I got a lot of mail when I was there, and so it was. I stayed in touch with many of them, and so then when I got out, one of my good friends that his health was poorly, and they didn't draft him, so he came and got me, and he was my best friend I buddied around with when I was at school, and so anyway, he come out Fort Riley, Kansas, and got me. And so he said, "You want to drive?" And he brought his dad's car. His dad had a '51 Chrysler. Oh yeah, I want to drive. Gosh, I hadn't in 25 miles was the speed limit in Korea, and so I was running about 35 or 40, and he said, "You got to drive faster than this." I said, "Boy, I think we're flying now." But it didn't take long to get over that, and that was good. And but times is different now. So from what I understand, but it's the service is still a good place for some fellas. I've got a nephew that spent 25 years in, just retired, good duty and good retirement, what have you. So it's a good place for people to be. But it's not that easy to get in now because we're choosy. We don't have as big a military, and so it's harder to get in. They're more selective who they take now.
So where were you when the war actually ended?
I was 2 days out of San Francisco. It was signed on the 27th of July, and the 29th I landed. 29th of July of '53 is when I came under the Golden Gate Bridge that morning, and that was a good sight to come under the Golden Gate Bridge, and because I shipped out of Seattle, Washington, so we come back through there, and it was good feeling. Mm-hmm.
Back when you were describing when you were first shipping over there, what can you describe more, like what did that feel like, kind of heading into the unknown?
Well, that was really scary. It really was, because we didn't have any idea, and if you talk to anybody that was there, they knew we didn't know anything, and of course they wanted to make you. That's just their game, They wanted to scare you. Like we said, well, where's the front lines? They just pointed north, and like over the hill. Well, when you're in Korea, when you get over one hill, you wonder what's on the other side. Well, it's just another hill. It's just another hill. It just never stops. I never saw any good, what we considered good farming land. They just don't have it. They farm, like I said, just as big as this room. Why, it would be a humongous rice paddy to what we saw. And when I was maintaining and building roads over there, of course, with the dozer, when I was pioneering those roads, we'd just go through those. Of course, they were abandoned because nobody was working them, but we tore up rice paddies that just take the dozer and run through them to make a road, And but they had done a lot of work building these little levees, I guess you'd call them, around their rice paddies, because they'd have to be level to hold water on them, so much water on them for so long. And anyway, but they'd done a lot of all manual labor, and we wrecked those but now then, I'm sure it's altogether different over there. They've done it now, but it was just different than anything we'd ever seen, and they've just. They had to work to survive. That's all they could do, is survive. I'm sure that was their way.
As you got back, what was it like, kind of readjusting to civilian life?
It didn't take very long. Of course, I got right back with my girlfriend, which ended up my wife. So, but that was in '53. But we weren't married till '56, so we dated for a long time. And but she is 7 years younger than I am. But no, I adjusted back to it relative quick. I wanted to farm, so but I was I was the middle child, and my brother and my dad, they had things set up for them, but there really wasn't room for me. So I tried it for about 2 years, and I said, this is no place for me. So I went to Springfield, where Betty was working, and I got a job over there, and I had done 2 or 3, and then I worked over there for almost 3 years, and then I rented the farm from my uncle, and I went back to farming. So I bought his equipment and started farming. So then we farmed for 23 years, and we struggled farming, which many of them did at that time. And so then we sold out, and I sold feed then for 14 years, and I worked at other. I like to sell. I like to talk, so I like to sell. I like that. And so then I changed. Well, the feed company took territory away from me where I couldn't make as much money, so I changed to another company, and I didn't like that as well. So I worked for them for 4 years, and then I quit and sold cars for 4 weeks. And I said, I'm not going to talk to people the way they think I got to talk to people. I just didn't like that at all. So we bought some rental property and what have you, and so then I quit that job because of just 4 weeks. I said, I'm not going to do that. So then I started my Social Security. I was 63 and a half. And then I got to doing odd jobs and this and that, and painting. So then a fellow I got acquainted with was a good painter, and he didn't have any money, but I could finance it. So we started a painting business together, and we worked together for probably a year and a half. And he wasn't the type of guy to be in business with, so I let him go. And he told me I couldn't make it without him because I didn't know what I was doing. I said, I'll either make it or I'll shut it down because I don't need you, because he was a druggie. So I got rid of him, and so then I survived it for another 16, 17 years. And but on a small basis, just one or two fellows, myself. We did many different things, little contracting jobs or buildings or remodelings and a lot of painting. And then we managed rental property. We had 66. We had 10 units of our own, and we managed 66 for this friend of ours, and rented them. We did everything, cleaned them, and my helpers, we'd go in and paint them, clean them and paint them, and my wife and I, we'd rent them, and she kept the books, and so we worked all the time. So we've done a lot of different things. Of course, she's worked for several years before that, so in fact, still working, like you told you, and so it didn't take me long to adjust back to. I adjusted back to civilian life pretty easy.
What kind of life lessons do you feel like you learned through your military service?
Well, I learned to appreciate many things. When I was in the tent in Korea, I promised myself, because we grew up with not a modern house when back in the 40s and 50s, and I promised myself I'm going to have a nice a home as I can have. I had this very good friend that his dad was a banker, and they had I thought a wonderful life, a wonderful family, wonderful life, and nice home, and I wanted one like that. And basically we've had a nice home and a good life. So that's one of the main things I guess I would say that I learned, to appreciate the good things, and I learned that a lot of other countries don't have the opportunity that American people have, and that's just an eye opener, because unless somebody sees that, you can see pictures and they can tell you, but until you see it face to face, it's different. So that's what I'd say that I learned the most, to appreciate what we have, and if you want to do it, you can work hard and achieve much of it. And so I don't mean you can drive a new Cadillac every year. I don't mean that, but you can have a lot of nice things that, and we have now. Then we had a boy and a girl, or I mean the girl and then the boy, and the boy he drowned, I guess 19 years ago, and he was a store manager for Walmart, so he learned to work, and he thanked me many times. Dad, when he worked up from sweeping the floor just when he was 18 years old, and by the time he was 25, he was a store manager, and then they put him a problem-solving store manager, so he moved 11 times in 13 years, and just so he was a mover and a shaker, and he could straighten things out, and he liked that. And so, but then he, in the Mohawk River out in Latham, New York, he and another store manager and the district manager was fishing on Saturday morning, and they tipped the boat over in the strong current. He could swim, but not that good, I guess. It was the only thing we didn't know, because he was sucked under and drowned. So he was married and had a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. So we've got them, and but of course they're now through college. Well, the boy, he's 24, I guess it is, and so anyway, yeah, he's 24, and the girl's 22, and she's finished her first 4 years of college, so now she's in college about another 5 years, hopefully to be a doctor. And the boy, he's some of the management part of a YMCA in St. Louis. So they both got good jobs, and they were very sharp people, sharper than their dad was. I know that. So we're thankful for that too. And then our daughter, why, she's a teacher, and she lives in Quincy, which is 75 miles from us, and she has 3 children, and the youngest one's in third year college, I guess, and the other 2 are out. Well, the other 2 didn't go to college, but they're working. So one of them's married, and we've got 2 great grandchildren. So but we're 75 miles. We don't see them as often as we'd like to, but we see them as often as we can. I put it that way.
How has your experience being in Korea and serving in the military, how has that affected like your opinion about war and current events?
I am proud of America. The communism over there, and I'm not an educated person, but the communism is all wrong, I'm sure. And without other countries helped in Korea too. Don't get me wrong. I don't want America to take all of, but they was the main ones. And but America can't support the whole world. That's what worries me. And then when I don't know how much America spent rebuilding South Korea with what we tore up. I just don't have. It wouldn't make any difference. I mean, it'd be too big a figure for me to understand. And sometimes I wonder if we're trying to help too many foreign countries that don't appreciate. South Korea has worked out good. They appreciate us, and I'm sure some of the countries in World War II do, but I don't know. I wonder, and so anyway, but basically we have to have this, I guess. We wonder why we do. As smart as we've got some smart people, why they can't talk about it and get along, but that's just not the way that's designed to be, I guess. But so really I don't know a lot to say about that other than I'm sure some of the involvement we've been in, like where we're at now, it's a no-win, but the last few wars have been that no-win after World War II. So, the Korean, I guess war was never declared, and I guess it really never was over, but the police action they talked about, but it wasn't police action, it was war.